Welcome to my apiary. I'm a big advocate of routers for doing so many different things in the shop for you. And one of the things that really comes in handy is when you need a router table. Now the base isn't on this router, but usually you put a bit in the router and then you route around whatever you're going to do. But sometimes you want to take the work to the piece, to the tool, and this is that. And this is a very basic router table. I've got this base plate. It's an auxiliary base plate that I put on the router base. Made it fit fairly snugly. It's not completely motionless in there. That's not usually a problem. And then I just scalloped out some handholds here to wedge my router in here, and then my router base, or my router motor, just fits in the base. I have to open it up. Fits in the base thusly. I find it easier to put the bits in the router while the motor's out. So I just take that out. And by the next thing I need to do on my little build that I'm doing is I need to route a particular profile. I love these bits I get from Lee Valley. Very high quality. Oh boy. Very high quality, very sharp. Half-inch, you get a half-inch and quarter-inch shaft. That's a quarter-inch collet, so I can't put that in there. A little bit of a problem because this bit is bigger than the hole in the base plate. So that means I need to put the router motor in the base. Push it pretty well all the way up. And then put my router bit in there. Here's a tip on router bits. You can see this shaft is straight up until the painted part, and they're not always painted like this, so you can't go by the paint. And then there's a radius, it comes out like that onto the bit part. And so what you need to do is you need to make sure you don't push that radius into the collet. You have to locate these by eye. That one actually bottoms out because there's nothing that tells you when to stop. Now, getting this tight is a little bit of a challenge. In my basic router table I've made, I just clamp this to my workbench over the vise. If I wanted for anything, I would just build a box under this. Who knows? I might do that. Just build a box so that it sits on the workbench. Maybe sits up a little higher to make running my pieces easier. Now, don't let this deceive you. I have run many feet of moldings and trim and whatnot through this, and it works great. So I can bring that bit right down to there before it contacts that base plate. So I have a basic fence here that I can just clamp on there, and that gives me really good stability for my pieces. So this fence opening is not quite as big as that router bit, So that means I'll need to start the router and clamp one end and bring that in here, cut that out a bit. So I'm not going to do that now. I just want to show you that. That's kind of a, it's interesting, I find, because it's such a cheap and easy thing. It's basically a piece of plywood with a couple of those scallop pieces on the bottom that's just got a hole cut in it. I don't even remember how I did that, because I cut a pretty even hole. I think I cut it. I don't know. I don't remember how I cut it. I remember routing that out with the router following the bottom lip or something. Yeah, I don't remember. That's a Miles Craft universal base, in case you were wondering. And that's my router table, so we'll be using that soon. So I'm going to turn my attention to the sides. I've got 4 pieces here of walnut, and I've got 4 pieces of cherry wood. I'm just going to rip these at 5 1/4 inches. This piece is nearly perfect width already, but it does need to be taken down a little. There's a little burn here. That's not important. That's not going to be seen. I've got my new router bit, and I'm going to cut these to width, and then I'm going to run detail on them with the router. So that's what I'm going to do. That's a nice high tooth count blade, but it's really not that sharp. I should be taking that one in. I'm going to the sharpening shop tomorrow, so maybe I'll take it. And I was pushing on it because any little slow feeding and you get burning. This is a little bit of a knotty area, so it burned a little bit. But you know, some of that gives a nice figure in the finished product. So I'll give you an idea what I'm doing here. This is the top, but the top and bottom pretty well act the same. This will get a detail routed after the top is assembled, because I remember I need to put those strips on the side. And it may get routed after the box is completely assembled. I can do this. So what's going to happen is you can envision this as the side piece I just cut, and that's the detail that I'm going to route, and that will fit in that slot really nicely and give you that. It's called a raised panel, is when you do that. You leave the field full depth and then you cut the edge down. It could be a wee bit tighter, but I don't think it'll be a problem that way. It's nice when you assemble if things aren't too tight. This one is the first one I did. It looks just fine, but I felt that the profile was kind of close to the base. So I backed off the bearing and made that lip a little bit longer, like that, so you can kind of see that. So I think I'm going to take the plunge and route them like this. This is my very basic router table. I've just taken a piece of plywood, carefully routed out a circle here to put this base plate on. My router base is screwed to that, and my router hangs underneath. And that's it. It's just clamped to the bench. My fence is clamped to the table, and that works great. I've run many, many feet of moldings and trim through this rudimentary router table. The only thing I could maybe want for is to build a box under it, so I could set it on the workbench or on table saw, clamp it down and work a little bit higher. So I think that would be handy, but this still works great. And I haven't cut these to length yet, but I thought I would route them before I do that. So that's some nice sapwood and heartwood it's called. You can kind of see where the tree rings are this way. So that's just under the bark, is generally a lighter color wood. People sometimes don't like constructing with that, but it's a really nice feature when you're just doing something decorative. Problem is I'm going to route most of that away. I could put it on the inside, but you're not going to see the inside. So I can get this figure that kind of comes down here. So that's kind of nice. Let's try it. So this is going to be at least 2 passes. I can run kind of freehand across that router and then get closer to the fence with 2 or 3 passes. You can see I've removed the bearing so that I could get closer in there, make that tongue a bit longer. This thing makes a lot of vibration and a lot of noise and a lot of wood chips. So hang on to your hats. I am going to stop and cut these to length because good routing practice is to route the end grain first. Because when I route that, I'm coming across the router like this, and it's going to blow this out a bit. And that's not a problem, because then I'm going to take all that chip out away with the side route. But if I do it the other way, then that might end up differently. So I'm just going to cut these to length. I'll do that on the radial arm saw. So I use my new production stop. Actually, I can set both of these. I'll set this one at 5. That's my short side. And this one is set at 9 3/8, which is 9 3/8. Now I'm going to double check with the saw blade. And that is bang on. And that one is almost bang on. Okay. So now you can see me demonstrate the production stop and the swing stop, flip stop, call it. Okay. It is a little wobbly. I'm not crazy about that. Now the trouble that poses for me is I've got much smaller pieces here, much harder to handle. So I'm going to use my grippy, it's very grippy push block. So if anything happens, my fingers aren't in the way. But I do have to route the end grain first on these. I'm going to go ahead and clamp up this end of these bases so that I can get that nice and straight and flush and square. And once that's dry, then I can get out my ends and my sides set in there, and then I can put the other end in there because this is too long. These pieces are a bit too long. And once I get everything sized perfectly and in there exactly the way I want, glue this other end piece in, and that's dry, then I can cut that on the table saw or radial arm saw, whatever I choose to, and that'll be one assembly. Because the next stage after that is to then again route a detail along the border of this base. And the reason I want to do that after assembly, not before, is because then I'm routing the detail across these joints, and that'll come out perfectly, assuming my joints are flush, which after this is glued up I can tell I have a little bit of sanding to do on some of these joints. These walnut ones are perfect, but this one's a little proud. So we'll get those perfect, and then do the detail once it's set up. This one I've actually got upside down, so I'll tip that over just so that it is the same as the other one. Yeah, a little bit proud. That's okay. And very important part of the glue up is a test fit. That includes test fit parts and test fit clamps. So I've got my little clamp here. That's going to clamp real nice. I'll get that lined up with my fingers, clamp that in place, and that should work very well. So let's go. This is always a bit nerve-wracking, but you know, it's got to be done. That's kind of what we're doing, right? doesn't work. Put a little bit of glue on here. I started woodworking a few years ago. Like I've been kind of been doing it most of my life, but not really seriously, and never super nice stuff. And I was kind of surprised how everything was just glued together. You know, I'm used to building houses and things instead of furniture. And then I started learning about woodworking, how it's done, and by cracky, everything's glued together. That's good glue too. That glue is stronger than the wood itself. Okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna dry fit the other end just to maintain spacing. I can actually just do this to maintain the spacing on that. So now I know that joint is square, or at least I'm pretty sure it's square. It doesn't take much glue for these little tiny parts. This joint got pretty tight. That's okay. I'll put the tight one together first. The glue always offers a little bit of lubrication for that. See, that actually came together really nicely. And my milling isn't too bad. My other part I'll just set here, and then my clamp can pull together on both of those. Okay, that's nice and tight, and that'll sit overnight, and then I'll have that assembly started. Squeeze out, a little squeeze out here. It's better to leave that alone. That'll get tacky, or even if it dries, then I can take that off. If I try to rub that now, I'll rub it into the wood. It's not as bad right now. I'm not going to stain this. So if you get glue on, especially on a lighter wood, and then you're going to stain it, the glue will prevent the stain from soaking into the wood. But I'm not going to stain this. I haven't decided on my wood finish, but I am thinking about it. I've milled the side panels for this box. On the router table, I'm happy with the profile, I'm happy with the finish. I seem to have gotten it nice and smooth with no wavers in it. What I'm not happy with, I'm happy with the thickness of this kind of tenon edge. What I'm not happy with is the thickness of this reveal here. And it's just, it doesn't look delicate, it doesn't look elegant to me. I can round that over with sandpaper. Probably couldn't round that over with a router bit because I don't have clearance here. But I'm going to go a different way. I want to take that away completely. I want to lower that panel, that center field down. I want a reveal there that's just big enough to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my planer for that. I'm just going to plane that off like that. And there's a limitation with my planer. You can only mill lumber that's a certain length. If it's too short, namely the side panels, that's too short. You have to do something different. And why that is if you look under the planer, you can see here I have the planer raised way up. But if you look under the planer, you'll see the cutting head in the center. and you'll see a roller, a feed roller here, and a feed roller here. So you can't have a piece that's too short to go under both those feed rollers while it's cutting, because you can get chatter. The piece can wobble in there, and it'll at very least ruin your piece. Could ruin your planer, and at very best it could injure you with the ensuing calamity. So I think these are long enough to make that cut. However, the little end panels are not. So I've constructed myself a sled here in order to mill the end panels. I'd like to mill them all at once. However, my sled isn't really big enough to do all 8 pieces. So what my sled has here is it has 3 strips of double stick tape, and this isn't sticking very well. I didn't expect it to. This lumber here doesn't really lend itself to this sort of thing. However, that's a nice long piece, so that double stick is just convenience. All this is here for is for the roller to run on and to not cause any snipe at the beginning and end of the pieces, because the pieces are very small. And so that's what happens. The rollers will roll on this strip of plywood here, and the work pieces, no dust on the back of the work pieces, will stick to this double stick tape here. Really press that down hard. This plywood that the sled is made from, this is interior grade plywood. It's made for cabinetry, etc., and it has a fairly slick finish, which grabs that tape far better than this is the exterior plywood that I built beehive pallets out of. So we can butt these right up because they're not going to really interact with one another. There's no reason to put spaces in there. I didn't wipe that one off, did I? And I want the grain direction to go with the planer. Okay, I don't want to be running that knife across the grain, because it'll chip it out, especially at the ends. Okay. Now, the problem with this idea, and the reason I'd like to have all of these pieces on my sled, is that I have to eyeball the depth. I have to do 2 depths. I'll plane this down to whatever depth I want, and then I have to lower the planer, the 11/16 that this plywood is, and run these. So hopefully they'll be the same. They're not butting against one another, so if they're slightly off, if it looks good to my eye, it'll look good, because that's exactly what you'll be dealing with. It'll be on two different faces. So these are nice and secured there. That's okay. I'm a little disappointed that didn't stick, but that's okay. And so now I'm going to run that through the planer. All right, so now I just have to get these off of here. This double stick really does stick well. And I don't want to break my pieces. Fortunately, the edges where I'm working will be all hidden. If I make a mark there, it's not a problem. So you can see the little reveal now. And I think you'll agree that that's far more elegant and more delicate than it was. Careful with chisel. You don't get your chisel. I was watching my video from the other day and I realized I got my hand in line with the chisel. You don't want to do that. It seems natural to hold your workpiece, and that's why you have clamps, though. See, I broke that one. That will be hidden, but that's not acceptable still. Go slow. Okay. So thank you for your service, double stick tape. You're no longer required. Scrap wood sure is a pain in the shop. It gets in the way. You move it around all the time and everything. But then when you need a piece for something like this, you need to have it around. I think what I need to do next is to line up the other end of this base. These side pieces of the base are too long. And I did that because where this exists will be in relation to this piece. See, it sits in here. It sits in like that, but it doesn't sit in at the end here. The two pieces will just kind of meet at the corner. There will be a space between them, and not a big space, but you know, have to make that happen. Now, I also have to take into account my top piece, because the length of that is not negotiable in the top. The top is already cut. So if we look at this upside down, the top will go together like this. And so therefore that size and location is set with the top. And I have two more milling operations to do. The top gets a profile milled all the way around. And I can't mill that here, of course, because there's that extra strip that goes on there. That needs to be all done, finished, dry, and then milled. So that's fine. That milling can be done absolute last thing, because it'll be, if it's all assembled, I just tip that whole box upside down on the router table, run that through, and Bob's your uncle. However, the base needs a profile routed along here, and if I assemble this box, I can't route that profile, because I need to take that base after assembly, tip that over a router table, and route that profile. So I can't do that after assembly. That'll, you know, I can do everything else, assembly, and then route this profile, assemble the top part with the sides onto here, and then I'll be done. And I'm talking through this not because I'm experienced and I know exactly what has to happen. I'm talking through this so that I don't forget and do things in the wrong order. But I also need to remember that when I'm putting the sides on, etc., these corner pieces need to go in here. And these don't fit into anything, so they have to be cut bang on the right length. So that's going to exist between the bottom and the top. And of course, if there's going to be a gap, I'm going to put it on the top because you'll see that gap on the bottom far more easily. Those are cut almost twice as long probably. You end up doing that. You end up cutting pieces a lot bigger than you need, particularly for this reason, because once you get smaller pieces, they're hard to handle and dangerous to handle. Okay. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'm once again going to set the bases aside, and I'm going to try to assemble the tops. I'll put a little bit of glue in there, and I'll set that side piece into that little rabbet that I've made. This side piece goes in here, so they will intersect a little. They're not quite square, so I have to get them the right way. Grain goes horizontal on these. So, yeah, they just, boy, they're bang on. I love it when things just line up perfectly. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. I'll put a little bit of glue on there. I don't want, you see how this piece is, the groove is bigger than the piece. So I need to make sure that when I put that together, it's pushed to the outside. I might have to jam something in here just as a clamping mechanism. All right, and my gut says glue the ends and let them dry. And so sides are going to be tomorrow. So I can get those as perfectly centered as possible. And what I have, you know what I have? I've mentioned a number of times on my channel about a few years ago buying out an estate sale. And I ended up replacing a lot of the equipment. It was not quite to my standard. However, there's a lot of stuff that I've kept and use quite a bit. Well, here's a pack of glazier points, and these are made to pinch into the wood behind a piece of glass or a mirror. So what I can do is when I glue that, I can just wedge a glazier point in behind there and make it stick. So if you don't know what a glazier point is, that's a glazier point. So that wedges in to the wood and holds a piece of glass in. Glass or mirror or something. So I think when I put this thing in here, I can just use that. It may or may not be permanent in there, but it looks to me like it is. It's just the right width to jam that in there. And yeah, and that little box of glazier points came with that estate sale. 50 cents. That's probably $5 today. Okay. So I'm going to get the bottoms, and now I'm starting to look at assembly, so I'm starting to look at grain patterns, ups and downs. This needs to be sanded still, but I can sand that after assembly. It's a tough call. It's always nice to sand things before assembly, but because of the way I kind of have to do this, I'm going to go with after. This is one thing that I wanted to achieve with the planing that I just did. This panel was sticking way out to this edge, and it just didn't look right to me, so I wanted that to sit inside. I guess to do this over, I'd make that a little longer perhaps. I had a picture of a case that I wanted to duplicate, but I didn't have it. Well, I had some overall dimensions, and that's it. So I had to come up with everything else. All right, we'll get just some glue out here. There's the tight bond. And I don't need a ton of glue on these. However, it's going to be kind of structural to the box, so I want to make sure I have enough for sure. I don't want to get a lot of glue on the outside. It does sit down in there, so there's a little bit of play allowed, but I definitely want to get some along the back edge and on the bottom of this. Let's see. Let's see if I can do this. And I'm working with the inside of this, so it's a little bit of squeeze out or something, and it's not going to be the end of the world. So now I can get that nice and centered by my fingers. I can't see the difference, but I can feel it. The difference side to side. I'll stick these glazier points in with a... I think you generally install glazier points with a screwdriver or some kind of a tool. I don't think they're generally hammered in. They're too small. So it doesn't go in there a long way, but it jams in there. That's all I need. I can set the side pieces in there for clamping supports. I might have to do that. That one's not going in there. Okay, we'll get this one in, and then we'll set up said clamping supports. Glue up's always a bit stressful. And again, I want to pick, if there's a difference, I want to pick top and bottom, and this is the top, so everything goes upside down. It's always exciting to start glue up. You mill parts for a long time, and then suddenly the project starts to take shape. It's kind of like framing a house, you know. You frame a house in a day. It takes you a month to make the foundation. Frame it in a day, and then it looks like a house. And then the weird thing is, it takes you 6 months to make it usable as a house. Unless you're Amish, and then it takes, a couple days. These people work fast. They got lots of people, right? You got lots of people. It makes a big difference. Okay, those glazier points went in nice. That's nicely centered. It looks good from the outside. And so does that one. And now, I think I'll just set these up on the inside and run some clamps, because they are, you know what, they're not quite. But I think it'll be okay. They're just a little shy of where I need them, but I think it'll be okay. These little Irwin quick grip, sure are a nice little clamp, very handy. I'll just set that up in there. I'm not going to squeeze it real tight. I just want to keep those ends in the general vicinity of where they need to be. I can use one clamp. I don't have very many of these clamps, so I'm going to use one here for both. Put that in the middle. Okay. So I think that's my assembly until tomorrow. It's a problem. You do a couple of minutes work and then wait another day. So you can see what I've got there. And we'll move on to the cherry wood box. I don't think I'm getting out of order. I think I've got it under control here. Same thing. Make sure the grain is sideways. I'm glad it's a little bit longer that way, because I can tell when I've got it wrong. So we got this and this. And here's an alternate method. A little bit of wood chip in there. Let's put some glue in the groove instead. You know, it's kind of hard to make glue fall down in the bottom sometimes. But I can actually get glue on the front surface because I'm sliding the piece down. But I don't want any squeeze out on that front surface at all. So I'm going to use a piece to kind of push the glue down off of that. Okay. So again, these glazier points are not part of the assembly. They're just a clamping mechanism. Okay, got that. And these panels, as you see in the other one, they don't intersect. So if I'm a little inaccurate, I've got this one sticking over the edge a little because I can feel that this small panel is actually wider than this area here. It's no problem because the two panels don't intersect. If they had to mate up, that would cause a problem. My glazier points are stuck together. There we go. Stick this one in here. My big fingers, it's hard to handle small things like that. Oh, it just slides right in. Fiddly stuff. Okay. All right. That looks... Oh, there's a ton of squeeze out there. It's not what I wanted. That is under the... See, I got squeeze out. It is under the top. So again, not as visible, but certainly not what I was going for. Just wipe that with a very wet rag. You can let it set and peel it off. So now you're seeing the color of that wood. There, that's very pretty. That one has no squeeze out. And I'll do the same thing with this little clamp here. Put it on there. I need a few hands for this. That little clamp doesn't want to stay upright. If you're going to buy Quick Grip, I shouldn't say Quick Grip, that's a brand or a trade name. If you're going to buy a one-handed clamp, in the store when you pick it up, just make sure it's really easy to use with one hand, because that's the whole point. Now, I've got some one-handed clamps here. Do not recommend them. They're actually from Canadian Tire, Mastercraft brand. Do not recommend them. I have them. They're the last resort for my clamps because I hate using them. they're not what I would recommend. And just, you can tell right in the store. You can try and operate the thing, and if it doesn't work smoothly, you'll hate it. Okay, there's my two quick glue ups for today. And I'm not sure I can do anything else today, because I want to use this assembly to get the base sized properly. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll line things up and see if I can do that, but I'm not sure I can do that. Because that base, where this end piece goes in the base, is not negotiable. It has to line up with that panel, that bottom of these two panels. Well, I mean these two as well, but that's kind of fixed. I've measured that, so hopefully it matches up. This is floating. I need to get this situated somewhere in here that's going to work, right? On assembling, trying to dry fit this, I'm feeling that these two rabbets are maybe not quite deep enough. So I'm just going to sand them. What I've done here is taken a piece of 2x4 and cut it at kind of a precise size. I've made it kind of a double bevel at that side, and wrapped a belt sander belt around it. Makes a really nice rough work sanding block. I think I was sanding polyurethane, so I think it needs to be changed. I think that's better. Like, this side fits okay, but this side is kind of sticky. That's feeling a little better. Keep going. Yeah, that might work. It's tight enough that it will stay where I put it, which is nice. Work on the other one. Oops. So there's a little woodworking tip that I actually struggle with when you're trying to. Woodworking is a lot like beekeeping in that it's almost 90% problem solving, especially if you're not working from very, very explicit plans. If you're doing that, then they give you a lot of tips and hints on how to do things, which is really nice, especially for me. I'm kind of more of a beginner at this. But sometimes I get so wrapped up in power tools and so wrapped up in how am I going to do this with a saw? How am I going to do the table saw or the router or the planer or something? How am I going to do? When all I need to do is grab a hand tool. You saw me using a chisel earlier, or a hand sander. Doesn't have to be a power sander. You can you can use a hand plane for this. So this is it's not a very high-end hand plane at all, but you can hand plane that. However, problem with a standard hand plane is that the plane iron is inset from the side. So if I were to plane that, I would make a step in it. That's not what I want. You can get, I don't believe I have one called a shoulder plane, and the shoulder plane is cut out here, so the plane iron actually is flush with the side of the plane. So a small, very small, even this is too big for this, shoulder plane would be really nice for that. I mean, I can take a little bit off here with this if it was dialed in properly, which it's not. And then that'll help give my sanding block a little bit of a head start. But this is working pretty good. And again, this is where the bottom panel goes into the box. I've made a big gouge there now. So again, it's the bottom, and it'll be under the panel after the contents are inserted into the box. I made a mess demonstrating that. Shouldn't have done that. Okay, so that one fits on there now. Look at that. All right. I applied some test finish. This is just an oil. It doesn't make the wood shiny. It's called tung oil, so you can see kind of where it's soaked into the wood a bit. So that shows the beauty of this wood. And I think I may just do something like that. Leave it a while, it dries. In time, with these oils, linseed oil, tung oil, they polymerize over time, so they kind of turn into a plastic. You can say, well, it's a natural plastic. It's an oil, so oil does polymerize. Simple fact.